probably some of the others will be joining us in a moment. So welcome to everybody who's with us on Zoom. Hi, Roy, Merle, and a welcome to anybody watching us on Facebook Live, on YouTube, watching us on demand later tonight or tomorrow, or who knows, a year from now, for all we know. But welcome. Thanks for making a little bit of time on your Tuesday morning to learn and be inspired, hopefully, by our guest today. Our guest today, I'm been super excited about this all week. And I'm going to get your name right. You were just talking about it, Janet. Your last name, right? Janet Marinaccio, right?
Yes.
I got it right. Janet Marinaccio, who runs, in my opinion, one of the most remarkable organizations and one of the most remarkable places I've ever visited. And that's, I really mean no hyperbole in that. As has been the case with a few of our guests. A few of our guests are at organizations that I visited, a long time ago, 7-8 years ago, when first trying to imagine what the Karsh Center could be. And a Temple member who used to work at Warner Brothers said, there's this place in the valley, it's in Pacoima. I said, it's in where? She said, it's in Pacoima. So I had to look at a map and figure out what Pacoima was. She said, it's called MEND and it's amazing. It's kind of like what you keep talking about you want to do at the Karsh Center. You should go check it out. And I think this was before Janet's time there, but I went out to this place in Pacoima. I found Pacoima. I discovered this place called MEND. I spent a couple hours, meeting the folks there and walking around, and I left. And my first thought was, if it wasn't in Pacoima, I wouldn't build the Karsh Center, and I would just put all of our energy, efforts, and resources and all of our volunteers towards supporting MEND, because it's so amazing and what they do is so amazing. The best way I can describe MEND, and then Janet's going to tell us a lot more in granular detail, I'm sure, is that it's sort of like the Karsh Center on steroids, to the nth degree. Some of you know, I volunteered at the now kind of oddly ironic, but I didn't know this at the time. I volunteered at the Santa Barbara County Regional Food Bank when I was in high school. The food pantry at MEND is, I would say, about 25% larger than the entire Santa Barbara County Regional Food Bank. It's remarkable. They have a clothing distribution thrift store type situation that is amazing. They have dental and vision services that are incredible, and perhaps most remarkable and most germane to the work we do at Karsh. They do all of this. They see, tens of thousands of clients a year using thousands and thousands of volunteers. I might be making this number up, but I hope I'm not. I remember somewhere along the line somebody telling me it's like 30,000 volunteers a year or something like that.
No.
I'm making that up. Just go with it. Maybe it's 30,000 volunteer hours. Maybe it was 30,000 volunteer hours. Maybe that's what it was. But it's an amazing place in a non-COVID world. I encourage all of us to make a trip out there. And so I'm thrilled to have Janet with us today, because as I said to her when she hopped on the Zoom, before all the rest of us, I cannot even begin to imagine how crazy things have been at MEND and how crazy they've been for you, Janet, since March, as they have been for many of us. But given all the work that MEND was already doing, given the fact that MEND is situated in Pacoima, which I've come to learn over the years is one of the neediest kind of sectors and areas in the valley, which came up for those who were with us, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago when we had Mark LaRanger from Chrysalis on talking about their work in Pacoima as well. So Janet, that's a long way around of saying welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm really thrilled to have you. So let's maybe just start, because I'm guessing most of us here know little to nothing about MEND. Tell us kind of on the meta level, what you guys are, what you do. And then maybe we can move to, what things have looked like in the past few months.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And it's really interesting because in some ways we talk about the Karsh Center and wanting to be more like you. So it's the Mutual Admiration Society. I think within nonprofit, though, we can all learn from each other. I think that's the best case scenario, is when we can regard each other as colleagues and assets and resources. We can all strengthen each other. So that really is what makes my heart flutter when it comes to the work that we're doing. So MEND started in really the late 60s, kind of informally. Some friends at their church were talking about the need in the community and thought, gosh, if we could gather resources and distribute them. Excuse me. Then they got a little more organized by 1971 and came up with the name MEND, and which stands for Meet Each Need with Dignity. And then by 1976, realized that they had something, and so it became incorporated then as a nonprofit. So we use 1971 as our genesis date. So we'll be celebrating our 50th anniversary next year. Should be interesting, depending on what happens with COVID, but we're ready no matter what. So the founding couple who really kind of spearheaded this, Ed and Carolyn Rose, their initial distributions were out of their garage in their house in the valley. Now we live in a 40,000 square foot building. So there have been some changes to our services though, Rabbi, that might surprise you, but I'll explain. So we still do food distribution. We are a food bank and a food pantry. So the food pantry is where you distribute directly to people. The food bank side is where you distribute to other food pantries, churches, temples, places where people come to get resources. We're unique in that there's not many, if any, that I really know of in the LA area that do both. We also, we've been building a lot of really intensive partnerships around food distribution as well. So we work with LA Family Housing and provide food for them to distribute to their residents, for example. We work with the Family Source Centers. There's housing, low-income housing development here in Pacoima called San Fernando Gardens. We work with LAPD, who has a partnership with them, and we distribute food through that. So we do a lot with food. We also have, when, in the olden days, it seems when we were, operating normally, we have a full commercial kitchen. We prepare food every day for our clients. We do a farmer's market type model on Saturdays, again, in the normal days, where we have food displayed, fresh fruits and vegetables, so people can select their own. That way, we're not just saying, here's a food box, good luck, I hope you like it. They can select what it is that they want from what we have. And it's called buon provecho, which basically means like buon appetito or abbondanza in Italian. So that's kind of our food universe. We also do our clothing distribution. That's on hold right now with COVID because we just simply don't have the capability to have the manpower to sort things that are given to us. So that's on hold. We do, if somebody comes to us and requests clothing for their children who've outgrown their clothes or something like that, we will give them clothing. We'll do a special distribution for them. And we do a small amount of diaper distribution. Rabbi and I were talking about that just before you all joined. The Karsh Center's done tens of thousands of diapers, and we've done about 6,000. But they're specifically for our enrolled clients who we know have that need. What has changed is we have added some intensive services. We do case management for some of our families. Having been there for 50 years, we decided to survey some of our clients and discovered that about a third had a parent or grandparent or both who came to MEND. So we looked at that generational poverty and said, we have to do something about this. So we started our first case management services called the Family Support Program. We enroll our most vulnerable families, provide them with case management, and then connect them with the resources that they need in the community. Our first year of doing that, we had enrolled a modest number, 18. We had one staff, and we used Masters of Social Work interns to volunteer to help with the program. 5 of those families no longer need our services because of the supports that they receive. So that sadly, this year was our second year, got interrupted back in March, but we're continuing to the extent we can. People living in Pacoima, I'll give you a quick profile of a typical client. They live in a substandard living condition. It may be a garage that is not an ADU. It's not a mother-in-law unit. It is a garage that is crammed with furniture. They've put like metal poles up for clothing racks. There's no plumbing, no heat, no air conditioning, no windows. Sometimes no cooking facilities. Other families live, doubled and tripled up in apartments. It's really, really challenging for them.
I want to interrupt because I have a question about that, which I'm thinking back and I asked Mark when he was talking about Pacoima and he didn't know, which is, so MEND's been there, going into 50 years now. And I think, I've come to learn that today, COVID or not, Pacoima really is kind of the epicenter of so much need in the Valley. And I guess 2 questions. One, maybe it's a chicken and egg question, which is, was that the case 50 years ago and that's why MEND was there, or MEND is there because that's where the couple was and MEND started, and just by sort of either coincidence or, as bizarre as it sounds, luck, it ends up that you're well situated. And then the second question, I guess, is today, why is Pacoima this sort of nexus?
Those are both good questions. So certainly Pacoima has been a sort of struggling community since MEND started, but actually this area of the Valley, and I don't know all the Valley history and the timing, was actually a middle class Black neighborhood at one point, because we had the, was it Lockheed was here at the time. And so a lot of folks came here for those jobs. And actually, if you drive down the streets in Pacoima, the houses are pretty. I mean, the architecture is.
I think that every time I come visit, I get off the freeway and there's this big fancy Costco and Lowe's and this nice kind of shopping mall center kind of right there off the freeway, and then one more block, and even right behind MEND. Those are nice homes in that neighborhood.
They're beautiful. They have a yard. They're on big lots. I live in Silmar, which is adjacent to Pacoima, and my lot isn't that big, but some of the lots here are 13 to 18,000 square feet. And the same thing in Pacoima in these very large homes. So, like a lot of communities, there's been a changing face of who lives there. And, people get pushed out of areas during, when other areas are gentrified and the profile changes. So it's kind of interesting in the Valley, wherever there is poverty, although we're starting to see more of a shift. People who are homeless are even, coming to the Valley and camping their campers out on Foothill Boulevard because that's the only place they have left to go where they're not being run out of town. But, if you just drive down the streets in Pacoima, it looks like a lower middle class neighborhood. You don't know that in the backyard, there's a lean-to with a family living in it, or a trailer. There are, in these deep backyards, there are trailers where people, who knows, I don't even know if they have plumbing. I have no idea what the situation is, but, many people that we serve are undocumented too. So it is a way to sort of stay hidden in the backyard or in the garage and whatnot. So, I think back in the early days of MEND also, we were dealing with the farm workers, and Cesar Chavez, our founders, Ed and Carolyn, marched with Cesar a lot. So I think there was a piece of MEND that was around to serve the migrant farm workers, and it just evolved as the community evolved. What I was going to talk about too is, so our case managed services have shifted from being on site to being virtual, except that we have the digital divide that affects people in poverty. Our families, many of them do have a cell phone, an iPhone, but that is the only technology they have, and they have a very limited plan. They don't have Zoom, and we can't sit and live stream with them and provide services. So we'll get into all the adaptations. But earlier, or just about a year ago, we started a program called Pathways to Wellness, because also within our community, there's a lot of chronic health conditions. There's diabetes, hypertension, obesity, that are diet related. So we looked at what are the ways that we can support the people that we're serving through nutrition. We've got a food bank, we've got access to food, we've got a lot of space. So we're doing things like nutrition classes. Well, let me back it up. We have 3 pathways to wellness as we see it. One is come to MEND. The food that we give out is largely fresh produce, healthy options. Just get in our door and stop eating fast food, stop eating the junk food, stop going to the corner store and filling up on whatever fills your stomach. The second pathway is our group intervention. So that's nutrition classes, cooking demonstrations, exercise classes, and then we have our one-to-one coaching where you set individual goals. The client will set individual goals around weight loss, managing their diabetes, etc. And they get that one-on-one support. Then we started that, and about 6 months later, COVID hit. So we had to rejigger what we were doing, which I'll get into when we get to that question. The last thing, the big change that you don't know about, Rabbi, is that we actually ended up closing our free clinic. From the mid-90s, operated a free clinic. Our first building that we were in on Van Nuys Boulevard had about maybe 1,000 square feet of clinic space. When our current building was built, it grew tenfold. We have 10,000 square feet. It's very expensive to operate 10,000 square feet of clinic. We considered changing our own license to become a federally qualified health center, which would give us access to other resources, to grants, to Medi-Cal, but the time and cost was really prohibitive. It would have cost us over $1 million to be able to get to that over a couple of years. So then we tried to find a clinic operator who is already licensed to come in and take over, lease the space from us. And we got to the altar, as I like to say, twice, but we couldn't get to I do. Primarily because we don't have enough parking, and the time and cost was also prohibitive for them. In the years since federally qualified health centers started coming into being, Pacoima being a high need area and the surrounding area being very high need, a lot of clinics popped up. We did a mapping about in a 3-mile radius, there were a half dozen other clinics. In a 5-mile radius, there's a dozen. So there's so much competition to get the client base in to be able to create the revenue to justify it. We couldn't get anybody in. Our last day of clinic operations was March 6th, just before COVID, safer at home. So
and I presume some of those, I know they all don't, but some of those FQHCs have dental care as a part of their offer.
Oh yeah, they all do. They all do.
So the big question, I guess, which since it's just March 6th and we've now been in COVID land ever since, I'm sure still waiting to figure out what's the plan for that, entire
for that
second
space.
floor.
Even since COVID hit, I've had 2 other clinics come in and take a look, and they came to the same conclusion. So probably what's going to happen is we will renovate the space. And look for other partners to come in. MEND, the thing that I think that MEND is, and the opportunity for us to capitalize on right now, is that we are an anchor institution trusted by the community, and we can be a connector and convener of resources. We don't have to do it all, right? There's a lot of partners out there who do it well, as you know. Because that's the model that that you use, and that's Magnolia Place, and that's Path. That's a lot of organizations that have done that. So it's very likely that will become vanilla space that can be rented out by other providers.
It's, I will just personally mourn for a second the fact that the dental suite had a much better view than my dentist's office. They had this dental suite with, not floor to ceiling windows, but windows everywhere and this beautiful view of the San Gabriel Mountains and all this natural light. I thought, this is spectacular.
It is.
So, look, it makes perfect sense because we know it's a very challenging space to operate in. Our dental and vision only work because we have an FQHC that runs them for us. Yeah. And all the more so to your point, obviously there's always need, but if the need is being met already by other providers who are in geographic proximity, then surely there's likely a better, might not be the right word, but better use of that space to serve clients in a different way to address a different need that they have that isn't being addressed somewhere else.
And truly, not to get too far into the weeds, but I think it's worth talking about, free clinics have very specific rules. You cannot charge, you can ask for a donation, you cannot charge. Getting the support, the level of support that we needed from foundations and from donors was really difficult. When nearby we've got the Northeast Valley Health Corporation, for example, our diabetes education program was about 40 clients. They serve 4,000 clients. So, when a foundation is looking at who do we support, they're not going to give us the money. So we started to see that dry up, and so we couldn't staff it. We ended up using students, UCLA students, who did, wonderful work, but they had very specific things that they had to accomplish. And so they were driving the treatment plans and driving up our costs, quite frankly, So sometimes clients would get more than you or I might get at our own dentist. So it was kind of an upside down model, and, it was really, really a hard decision. Our board took it very, very seriously. And we took our time. We did everything we could to retain it. And we could close it with the knowledge, like you said, that there are plenty of services in the community.
And again, like I said, it creates the opportunity to address a different need. And look, you don't need me to tell you this, but I commend you and your board for not, I think, falling into the thinking that so many of us frequently do, which is, well, we've always done this, so we need to keep doing this. Yeah. And the world changes and needs change, and the willingness to reevaluate and adapt and not simply continue doing something because you've always done it, I think is what makes a strong organization. So thank you. You don't need me to tell you that, but kudos. So what does the last 6 months look like, post clinic and into COVID?
Well, like everybody.
I imagine, if I showed up today, the lobby there's not filled with clients. I imagine there's not,
No, our building is empty. Everything has moved outside. So our case managed services have gone remote to the extent that they can. We provide phone check-ins. Actually, we have a wonderful partnership with West Coast University nursing students. They are creating customized food bags for our clients with chronic health conditions, and then doing home delivery. So they'll go knock on the door, step back, the client knows they're coming, it's scheduled. And then they'll do a health check-in with them. How are you doing? How are you feeling? How's your cholesterol? All of that kind of stuff. They're pretty much the only ones in the building, and staff and volunteers. Everything else is outside. All of our food distribution is now in our parking lot. And we have seen a 400% increase in people coming to receive food. Now, our typical MEND client is not driving. Some of them have cars, but most of them walk or take a bus. The car line, and I'll try to describe for you the distance. So we are on San Fernando Road, just east of Van Nuys Boulevard. It's about maybe a mile down to Van Nuys Boulevard. Our line often stretches beyond that. We do distribution on Tuesdays and Fridays, and miraculously, my team, God bless them, they have been so resourceful. They have modified and modified and modified until we got it down to a science. We are able to distribute food within 2 hours on both of those days. and nobody gets turned away. Since March 19th, which is the first Safer at Home order, we have distributed 516,000 pounds of food. And that has benefited over 60,000 people. So I've sort of been looking at what other food distributions have been doing, and they'll talk about, we're giving out an 11-pound box of food. Lately, in the beginning, we had like a lot of us. I don't know if you guys saw this, but our food supply retracted because grocery stores were overwhelmed. We get a lot of food donated from grocery stores. LA Regional Food Bank was overwhelmed. We get some stuff from them, and we were giving out small boxes then. Now, the typical client will get 40 pounds of food. It includes non-perishables. It includes eggs, milk, some sort of protein, a meat of some kind, and bread. We've been fortunate to get some grants to be able to purchase some of that food as well. So we always make sure that eggs are very popular. In May, we usually do our food drive with the post office, the Stamp Out Hunger Drive, where you get a bag in your mailbox. I don't know, it's throughout the Postal Service territory, but we serve the Valley for that. And we get over 100,000 pounds of food for the summer doing that. And we didn't get to do it this year. So we're trying to ramp up our food drives to make sure we can keep on giving out the same volume of food.
So have you seen, well, two questions. I guess first, has this, pandemic uncovered new areas of need that folks have that, you might think about exploring or trying to address? Or is it just, like food, right? An even greater need in the areas in which we always know there's need?
Yeah, well, I think the immediate is that even greater need right now, because so many people have lost their jobs or lost their incomes, lost their businesses. I think what remains to be seen is what happens once we get sort of past the pandemic phase and the economic recovery. And certainly we've been talking internally as we prepare for our next strategic plan. MEND has always focused on people in poverty and those under the poverty line. And my question is, okay, so if I earn $1 more than the poverty line, then I'm not in poverty? That's not true, especially not in LA, right? There's that gap between living wage and the poverty line. And what's going to happen with the people in that area? So we are starting to have conversations about that to see what MEND's role could be in that recovery. And again, we're really focused on this connector convener role. I'm having a conversation with another provider here in the Valley that does domestic violence services. That is a need that has been documented as coming up because people are locked up together. Families are having crises around family violence and anger. Kids in foster care, or kids are not actually, they're not getting as many DCFS calls. So we're wondering what's happening with kids who maybe should be in foster care if their families are in crisis. We just don't know. So I think we're trying to keep our finger on the pulse to see what's happening and then respond accordingly.
It's so funny you mentioned the domestic violence, the DV issue we had a few weeks ago. The pro bono director from Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles, and they do a lot of DV work, talking about just the incredible spike they've seen in domestic violence cases, with everybody locked up at home and how it becomes kind of a powder keg, unfortunately, in unfortunate circumstances. And I think you're right on that the economic impact of this entire ordeal. Maybe it's a bridge too far to say it hasn't begun yet, because it certainly has begun, but has certainly not peaked. And I think we will be feeling for a very long time, particularly folks, as you mentioned, who are kind of in that, lower zone that, well, technically they're not in poverty, but they don't make enough money to live. And so I wonder, have you yet seen that the economic reality of this change the face of the client, right? Like, are you seeing folks come through the door or the parking lot, as it were, who, 6 months ago would have never thought they'd be at MEND,
Yeah.
seeking help?
Yeah. I mean, you can see it just by the cars that are coming through our parking lot. We've had Teslas, we've had Cadillacs, we've had Mercedes, BMWs. Some people have made comments like on social media, oh, all the cars are really nice. You know what? Maybe there's a couple of people who are taking advantage of getting free stuff, but the reality is they don't know what they're going to get. We don't even know what's in the in the boxes that we get from the LA Regional Food Bank, for example. They're all packed up. I always say people aren't coming from Beverly Hills to Pacoima to get a free bag of food. These are people that are in need. And in the beginning weeks of this, for sure, we saw people who had never imagined going to a food bank, never thought even about a food bank. What is a food bank? There's a lot of shame and embarrassment. We've had the press come a few times and want to cover it, and there are so many people who don't, they would love to get a firsthand story from people, and 9 times out of 10 it's no, 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 I don't want to talk to the press. So it's hard to take a handout. And I'll say, even among our clients who are regulars who need us for food security, there is a level of, I don't necessarily know if it's shame, but there's an embarrassment of needing it. And there are so many people. One of my most heartwarming stories was a guy who was homeless, who had been coming for years to MEND, and he got stabilized. He got, his life situated, and he came back with cash to make a donation to MEND. I think it was like $50. And we said, no, 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 that's okay. You don't need to. And he insisted because we had given him so much and he wanted to be able to give back. We have people who want to volunteer to give back. I think a majority of people are not just coming with their hands out going, gimme, 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 gimme. And certainly now the people who are in crisis coming, they sit in line a mile long in their car to get food. That is a huge commitment, and it is, like I said, I think it's embarrassing for some people, or they feel inadequate to have to do that, but they know they have to feed their families.
I think it takes a tremendous amount of humility,
yes,
to ask for help and to accept the help.
Yes.
And to your point about, $100,000 cars in line, we see it too. And the same thing, oh, really, we're helping, they're gaming us, whatever. And I've always felt, just as you articulated, one, that if you're putting your hand out, who am I to judge you?
Right.
And two, and actually the rabbis 1,000 years ago say this, that, you'd rather give somebody who doesn't need it food than not give someone who does need it food, right? If that's part of the cost of doing business, is that someone who doesn't really need it is going to get it, but it means that no one who is in need will go without, then absolutely, right. That's what you do.
Yep.
But no, it's a tremendous amount of humility. I could fire questions at you all day, Janet, but I know some of them are. I know the folks here well enough to know that they have some too. So I'll open it up to anybody else who has a question for Janet. You can raise your hand. You can do a virtual hand raise, pop it in the chat, whatever you're most comfortable with. Anybody have a thought or a question you want to? Gail, you can unmute yourself. Gail, you're muted.
Hi. By the way, I grew up in the Valley before MEND. And I remember family friends who were just a middle-class family in the film industry buying a brand new house in Pacoima. It was really a nice neighborhood, not fancy, but just really nice. I was wondering about how the board structure developed. Was it from the Rose family? And how long ago did a board begin? And because it sounds like an enormous responsibility and undertaking to create some structure for such a big organization.
Well, I don't know specifically back in the early days, but certainly as soon as they incorporated, they had to have a board. As soon as they became a nonprofit, there was a strong affiliation with the Catholic Church, and MEND started out as all volunteer. There were some nuns that were involved early on in operating the organization, and I think the initial board was, the Roses and their friends who were involved in this. And excuse me, my predecessor was there for 29 years, was hired in the mid to late 80s. And she was the first, ED CEO of the organization. And I think at that point was when it really started to develop the more formal structure. We've seen a lot of changes, even since I've been there in the board structure. I think one of the things that I brought to MEND was, I came from Goodwill before. I worked for Goodwill SoCal and I worked for Goodwill International. And, with the retail stores, Goodwill's almost like a hybrid. And there was a very strong sort of business framework on how we approached everything. And I think I've shifted MEND and our board more toward that. So we're becoming, so in the early days, the board was a working board. They were in it up to their elbows and doing the work. And little by little, we're shifting to more of a governing board and letting the team manage the organization. Does that answer your question?
Sort of, yes. Do they have financial responsibility at all for the?
Yeah, our board has a $5,000 give-get. We do make some exceptions. We have some folks on the board who have, lived experience, or, maybe they have a background in social work and they can add some dimension to the board's contributions. So they may give a little bit less, but it's a $5,000 contribution.
That makes me think, Janet, and a question from some enlightened self-interest, because it's something we're starting to think about at Karsh. Probably not at the board level, but do you have any outlet or group of either current or former clients that help, at least in an advisory way, inform, no?
Not yet, but that is actually something that is on my radar. So, the first order of business when I got to MEND was to stabilize us financially. We were having some financial troubles. We had to make some programmatic decisions like closing the clinic. Now we're looking at a couple of things. One, I want to start an advisory committee that includes people with lived experience as well as, folks with some expertise in programmatic areas. And then the other thing that I'm working on is building an associate board. I'm avoiding the word young professional or junior board because there might be somebody who's not a young professional, but who wants to learn about board governance and use that almost as a pathway to board service, but to help, build, to be ambassadors for the organization. So yeah, those are my projects for the year ahead.
Well, we'll figure it out together.
Okay, deal. It's, Gail, what I would say too is that, nonprofit organizations have to constantly evolve. What worked 50 years ago doesn't work now. What worked 2 years ago isn't going to work now because COVID is changing. There will be no more old normal. There's going to be a new normal. And having the board and the staff be flexible and willing to change and move away from we've always done it this way mindset. It's essential now. I keep telling our board, now is the moment. This is the moment in time for us to make the decision about the future. If we hang on to the past, we're going to crash and burn.
It reminds me, and again, kind of to my point earlier about you guys making, I think, a courageous decision to not simply maintain the status quo when it doesn't make sense. Our senior rabbi said, I think it was the last in-person meeting we had that we didn't know was the last in-person meeting we were going to have in March, like 10th or something. And he said that his, estimation was that, not even really knowing the extent of what we were going to look at and be living through, but that this was the kind of environment in which, organizations and institutions who are strong get stronger, and organizations who are weak, get weaker. That there's an old joke that people like about the French, that they're like everybody else, just more so. That's what kind of thing does, right? It just makes you more so. So if you were in financial distress and it was mismanaged, you're done. If you were strong and nimble and able to be innovative and create new opportunities, then not to say that it would be easy, but this will ultimately be something that you thrive in, and they see this as an opportunity to address new needs, to rethink the way you do things, and to come out of it stronger and serving more needs.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I think it's going to happen across the board. I think it's going to happen in restaurants, it's going to happen in business in general, and in the nonprofit space too. So, I'm happy you guys are figuring it out.
Yeah.
Someone else was about to say something before I interrupted.
I think it was me,
Okay,
not
Gail.
someone else. It's okay though. It's okay.
Anybody else? Roy?
Just curious to get a understanding of the picture of the relationship between these two organizations, between Karsh and MEND. What are the levels of engagement that, between the two? That's for you, Rabbi Beau.
I think, go ahead, you start and then
I'm going to start. I'm going to say, we look forward to it being a deeper, I would say, more robust, relationship. At this point, for the most part, I would say both, personally, I'll call Janet a friend, and institutionally, I would say, we're friends. But in terms of programmatically, we have yet to collaborate on anything other than, kind of best practices. And like I said, I went out to MEND, 7-8 years ago, met Janet's predecessor. And then interestingly, I have subsequently, we're now in the kind of the midst of our, I would say, third round of some staffing changes at the Karsh Center. None, Lila's not going anywhere, nobody needs to worry. Nor is Lizzie or Francis. But during every iteration, when we kind of had a significantly new group of staff, I've taken them on a field trip to MEND, because I've always felt like there's a lot to learn there. And so our most recent trip, which was, I don't know, a year ago, maybe something like that. Maybe a little more.
maybe. I think so.
Yeah, about a year ago. I took our current team out there, and Janet, I think, was still relatively new. You've been there how long? 2 years?
3 years. 3.
And so we got to meet Janet. Our team got to meet Janet and meet her team. And then I know they've subsequently been to Karsh to kind of see what we're doing, and have deeper conversations with our team. So I think that I've said this many times, and most of these folks you've all heard me say this, which is that historically, in my experience, there's a lot of mediocrity in the nonprofit world at every level. And whenever I encounter a nonprofit organization that, is incredibly well run and has an amazing mission and runs their, and I use this in the best sense of the word, runs their business well and serves their clients well, those are the kind of places that I want to be in relationship with and be in business with, and think that we ought to be. And so, and we should support. So that's, I don't know if that answers your question, but
I echo all of that. And maybe, you know what, when this is all over, there is a conversation for us to talk about, really having a collaboration.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's also the last piece I'll say that MEND is, at least for me, still, and one of the reasons I keep taking staff out there, the only sort of, co-located multiple service experience that actually uses volunteers, I think, in a really deep and meaningful way, which is, baked into the mission of the Karsh Center. And in full disclosure, some of our volunteers are with us today, but in full disclosure, I don't think we have not yet really achieved that to the level that we want to. And most organizations haven't. Either it's not a part of their mission, they don't really care, right? Like PATH, they use volunteers, but that's not really a part of running their operation. Magnolia also is amazing, which is for those on our call who know her, where our executive director was prior, or 2 jobs prior to Karsh, but that's not really part of their mission. MEND is really the only place I've seen that leveraging and using large numbers of volunteers regularly and in deeply meaningful ways has been a part of the organization from day one and still is. And that's,
and we're
rare.
continuing to evolve that. So as soon as COVID hit, we had everybody canceled. We had groups scheduled to be there. That was also part of our initial panic was, oh my God, what are we going to do? We partner with a lot of corporate groups. So Universal Studios, for example, does a lot of volunteering. Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Kaiser. We have these large groups that come in and everybody just canceled. We're ramping some back up. But what we've learned through this is that using large groups and making sure they can be well trained so that we don't have to constantly retrain during COVID has been, so we're looking for groups that can make a regular commitment. But the other thing we're doing is these sort of larger, almost cause partnerships. So for example, Valley Presbyterian Hospital did a food drive for us. They brought in 3 tons of food. They doubled what they brought in last year. They're also a financial donor, and they wanted a group of their staff to come out and volunteer to distribute food. So that kind of got us going to package these volunteer experiences. So Anthem did something with us around our families with babies. It wasn't just diapers, it was bottles. It was all these different kind of baby bundles that we were giving out. Plus they gave a financial contribution and came and passed out the items. So we're continuing to we want it to be an experience for people, not just, you've heard of the term voluntourism, right? Where people will go, and help the children in Africa. And it's all about the volunteer having the experience and sort of almost secondary that the beneficiary benefits. So I don't love that term because I think you can turn that kind of experience also into a life-changing experience for the person. So Brian Stevenson, who wrote the book Just Mercy and the film Just Mercy, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but one of the things he talks about is proximity. That until you're proximal to whatever the issue is, the person, the people experiencing that, you can't really have true compassion for it. So the deeper we can have our volunteers engage with our mission and with the people being served, the more proximity they have, the more real true compassion and empathy that we can have. Can we change the world? I don't know, but we can certainly change some people in their understanding. We have a lot of parents who want to bring their kids around. During the holidays, we do a big, I don't know what we're meeting tomorrow to figure out what we're doing this year, but we usually distribute toys and gifts to families, and we're not going to probably be able to do that this year, but a lot of families want to bring their kids to show them how good they have it. Well, that's fine, but there needs to be, I think we have to make sure people do some introspection on, why else they're doing it, because otherwise it feels exploitative. So it's a fine line, but we try to make sure that we're straddling that line and covering both sides. Does that make sense?
It does. And I can't think of, maybe a better note to sort of leave us with today. And frankly, an inspiring one. Because I think to your point, that's why we all care about this work, because we do want to change the world, even if it is, one small bit, small step at a time. So Jen, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. I look forward to many more conversations. I look forward to seeing you in person again.
I know, right?
Are again advisable. And thank you everybody again for joining us today. And hopefully join us next week. And with that, have a wonderful Tuesday, everybody.
Everybody, thank you so much.
you.
Have a good day.